turning crisis into opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of Körber-Stiftung to the first hybrid Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. When I concluded this forum last year in November, I did not expect, and who would have expected, that the year of 2020 would become such an extraordinary year, with a pandemic that has brought large parts of our world to a standstill and which works as a multiplier for some worrisome trends in international relations. Think of, for example, the growing competition between China and the United States. But it is by no means predetermined or even inevitable when we think about how the world after the pandemic would look like. It depends on the willingness of world leaders to come up with common solutions for common problems. And in this spirit, we have chosen the title of this year's Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, Turning Crisis into Opportunity, Europe in a Post-Pandemic World Order. After the outcome of the American presidential elections, leading German politicians from Chancellor Merkel to Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier have once again reaffirmed Europe's commitment to take on more responsibility in global affairs. However, the German public remains rather skeptical in that regard, according to our annual opinion poll published in this year's edition of the Berlin Pulse. 49% prefer restraint in international crisis, while 44% argue for more involvement. 51% think Europe should become more independent from the United States, while 45% wish to rely on the United States. So a rather ambivalent picture indeed, and we will hear more on that later on. Today we are excited that more than 1,000 participants have registered on our virtual conference platform, and many more are following our live stream today. This shows, in the midst of a pandemic, the interest to discuss German and European foreign policy is greater than ever. We founded the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum in 2011 together with the German Foreign Office to do exactly this. And we have perhaps this time the best possible lineup of speakers to discuss these topics. I would like to thank our fantastic team of the Berlin Forum for their tireless effort to make this first hybrid Berlin Foreign Policy Forum work. Our program director, Liana Fix, will lead us through the program today. I would also like to thank the German Foreign Office for the excellent cooperation. We are honored and grateful that German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas will, for the third time in a row, open the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, this time together with his EU Trio Presidency colleagues, Portuguese Foreign Minister Santos Silva and Slovenian Foreign Minister Logar. Welcome to Berlin. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I wish you all an insightful day. Follow the debates, ask your questions, take part in our surveys, connect with fellow participants, and enjoy exclusive background discussions on our conference platform. Our live stream viewers are invited to contribute via Twitter with the hashtag #BerlinForum, #BerlinForum. And now, without much further ado, I would like to pass on to the moderator of the first session, Anna Sauerbrei, from the daily Der Tagesspiegel. Let the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum begin, and to quote our founder Kurt Körber, let's talk with each other rather than about each other.
Ja, herzlich willkommen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all of you. It is really a very interesting moment in time in order to talk to the three foreign ministers of the presidency of the EU, the situation is rather in the middle of the pandemic, although we see some light on the horizon with the vaccine, but that will mean we will have new conflicts of distribution. The Americans have just elected a new president, and the EU is in the middle of negotiating the Brexit process. It's in the middle of a dispute also about the Corona Recovery Fund and how to distribute the funds. So I'm very happy to have the three ministers. Mr. Maas, let me start with you, since you represent the acting presidency, turning crisis into opportunity. This is the topic of our panel today. What do you think do we see at the moment, the opportunity or the risk?
Well, it's not just the title of the panel, and I think it's above all always the task of politics to see to it that from a crisis, turn a crisis into an opportunity. If politicians are not able to do that, they fail. This is true for this situation as well in the COVID pandemic. It's a global subject, but also it has a great challenge for the European Union. So the European Union is criticized a lot that they're not able to come together quickly. But I think what we've managed to do within the European Union, even if you had to lock up the government leaders for 4 days in Brussels, we did reach an understanding about the greatest recovery fund in the history of the European Union. And this has just shown that we are able, if it becomes serious, we can be very quick in our action and act in solidarity, because we know exactly that pandemic can only be overcome together. To believe that you can find a solution nationally, but around you, pandemic still carries on, that won't work. So I think what we see today, especially the fight of the virus, and on the other hand, we prepare that the European economy is to be put in a situation that they can recover as quickly as possible from this crisis. We invested a lot of money for that, and at the moment, we're in the final phase of negotiations, and that's not simple, as we all know, but we will find a solution for that too. And I'm absolutely sure that both for the multi-year financial framework as well as the recovery fund, we will take the decisions in the coming days that the money can be made available. There are countries that are so badly affected by this crisis that desperately need these funds, so that I believe it is a phase in which I believe a lot of responsibility needs to be shown by everyone. We, as in the presidency, we try to bring about this agreement and also to provide the evidence that in this crisis you are able to act as the EU, so that there are the famous lessons learned and that there is an opportunity in this crisis, because we continue to discuss this. What does it mean in a pandemic? How can we manage to guarantee the supply with medical products, for instance? And this is a subject that we hadn't dealt with before. What about supply chains within Europe? They need to see to it that in such a crisis situation, we are able to supply ourselves, and that in a community of solidarity. And at the same time, we Europeans has come out worldwide that the vaccine, which we will have soon, it will become a global good. So it doesn't only reach where those live, who've got the main funds to pay for it, but also there where this is not the case, especially where the vulnerable regions of the world are. And if we are able to achieve that, then I believe we've turned this crisis into an opportunity, and this is what we're working on. And the decision has not been taken yet. But well, at some point, once this crisis is over, we can maybe say that we have turned this crisis into an opportunity. And if we haven't turned that into an opportunity, then we have failed. So these are very many important points that you mentioned that we want to go into detail, but Minister Santos Silva, maybe the question to you. And Portugal is going to take over the presidency in January from the Germans. So what is the main thing? Crisis or opportunity at the moment? As a citizens, you might have heard this mantra too much, that there's an opportunity in a crisis. But would you say, from a foreign policy point of view, the opportunity is still there?
Yes, I think so. And it is very important that the recovery Europe needs be conceived by Europeans themselves as an opportunity to transform our economy and our society. And these are really the main priorities of the Portuguese presidency. We have to put in place the decisions that we made in July and in October, the ones Heiko was referring to, the multi-annual financial framework and recovery fund. The responsibility of the Portuguese presidency will be to help the European Commission to put in place the programs that constitute the multi-annual financial framework and also to accelerate the approval of the national plans of recovery and resilience. But we have to favor the European recovery in a sense, in a direction that it can also mean the transformation of the European economy. In what sense? In the sense that our leaders defined in the strategic agenda for the European Union for the forthcoming years, meaning the double transition, digital transition and the green transition. And we think that in order to guarantee the success of both transitions, we have to invest a lot in the European social model. The European social model, the European pillar of social rights, is the very base of our identity as democracies, of our force as modern economies, and of our resilience as societies that praise the equality of opportunities. So I think, in my view, this crisis, meaning the need to accelerate the recovery, the need to safeguard the internal market, has also to be conceived as an opportunity to transform our economy in a more green and digital way and to reinforce our social solidarity that constitutes the very base of our democracies.
Mhm.
Minister Luger, what is the predominant element in this situation? What do you think? And do you think that this crisis is an opportunity for transformation, as it was just said by Minister Santos? First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation and for having organized this forum. It is very important for us three ministers to get together in this moment of crisis. These are very important moments in the development, and it's a unique opportunity for us to get together and to have an exchange, because we are going to steer the European Union one after the other, and we have a lot of tasks. At the moment, we are still in the middle of the crisis, and this crisis has shown many anomalies. And those anomalies have become part and parcel of the way in which the European Union works. But this crisis is also an opportunity at the same time. We can overcome the obstacles that we have seen when it comes to taking decisions. And we have to focus on our geostrategic consideration because of the crisis situation. The European Union, even in times of crisis, has always found a solution. And even when it's nearly very late, really very late, we will be able to find a solution. That is a principle we have shown to be well proven, and I think we can continue doing that. I also believe that because of the frequency of crises that we have seen in recent years, we will continue to function well. We have to function well. Even if it gets quite late, it's a challenge to ensure the functioning. And I hope very much, and I also trust the European Union. I believe in the future of the European Union. And here we need to stay in touch and talk to our citizens of the European Union. And we need to make sure and try to analyze all the problems that we have and find a compromise that is acceptable for everyone in order to implement decisions. This crisis is a new opportunity to think out of the box, to develop a new European strategy. I'm particularly happy to see that there is solidarity amongst the EU member states. This solidarity concerns the funds that we need to distribute in order to stem the consequences of the pandemic crisis. And we also see solidarity when it comes to decisions on the EU level. As far as the distribution of vaccines is concerned, we see that solidarity, as soon as it will be available, will be agreeing on a distribution mechanism. And we also have to think about how to develop strategies to make sure that our critical infrastructure remains functioning. And we need to provide a European framework and make sure that we as the European Union don't become too dependent on third-party states. If in the course of the crisis we have vulnerabilities as far as infrastructure is concerned, we do have some deficits regarding the supply of medicine, and we so far have left it to outside countries to produce the medicines because they are much more cost efficient. And we have also seen that the EU has had no efficient strategy of communication. We do have a financial framework, we do have an idea about the health policy, and we have an economic crisis. And we need a more robust system. This will be one of the goals of our presidency when it comes to the functioning of the EU, to make it more resilient, to make it more robust. I'm also happy to note that people are aware of the need of having a transatlantic dialogue. We have two key partners in the world. We are two key partners in the world, and we need to cooperate very closely. And this crisis has shown how important it is to work together in that way. That is to say, as far as the future is concerned, I am optimistic. We're still in the middle of the crisis, but we already have learned a lot. We have learned a lot from this crisis, and we know that we can achieve a lot. Well, the EU has created a recovery fund. Mr. Maas, during the first lockdown, things didn't turn out quite well, and we didn't succeed in staying pan-European. We closed the borders. There was an export ban on personal protective equipment. There was a lack of cooperation. Why are you so sure this won't happen again if the pandemic stays active in?
Unfortunately, we've already got the situation that the pandemic has got the next wave. In March, we had higher infection rates. We have now got higher infection rates now than as compared to March. We're in the second wave. There's all countries in the European Union have taken measures to bring down the numbers. We're in the midst of it. So I think we can see that the mistakes that we made in the spring are not going to be repeated. So we've learned our lesson. So that starts with closing down the borders, which we did very quickly in the spring. And there was great problems, not just for the people living in the border regions, traveling to and fro. And I think it's clear to us all that in fighting the pandemic, or in the second wave, we need a very coordinated approach in contrast to the first wave. And I think in all points this is the case, that we're doing this. We're supporting ourselves. For instance, if it's about capacities in the hospitals that are exhausted in one country to take over patients. We did it also in the first wave, but we're better prepared now. So the distribution of equipment and of masks and testing kits, as well as ventilation, is organized and coordinated in part at the level of the European Union. So there's many things that in the first wave didn't work out very well, admittedly. So based on the experience we've had, we're improving this, and I think that's very important for the citizens to show that we're able to learn from the lessons and not to repeat any mistakes. And we've also seen that closing down borders only made a little contribution to stopping the spread of the pandemic, because the factors are, in many cases, internal factors that led to the rise in infection numbers. What were these factors? Well, in our case, it was the case that after the summer break, 40% of the new infections was down to returning tourists. So tourism played a big role in Germany. And the second large area, which is very difficult to rule as a state, is the infections in the private sphere. So in other words, we have taken measures that aim at, above all, to reduce the contacts that there are and to reduce the infection rate. And when you look at it in Germany, the measures that we've taken at the moment, we're now discussing whether they're sufficient or they have to be aggravated and extended even more in comparison with other European countries. When I look at the rules in France, in Italy, in Spain, also now currently in Portugal, the measures that we have in Germany are surely not the sharpest ones. And so if you look at some protests that you have in Germany and you compare that with measures in other countries where they don't have such protests, I would wish that the view of some people should go beyond the own backyard and their own borders to see the context. But I do believe that we were not prepared for the pandemic as you would have wished for. Maybe it just exceeded our imagination, because we didn't expect anything like that during our lifetime. But I think you can understand very well at the moment that the mistakes that were made in the spring now, that is even worse with regard to the infection numbers being even higher, we don't repeat these mistakes. And that also contributes to the situation that mortality rate is not as high, and not just in our country, but also in other countries. So that is a result also of the better coordination at a European level. Mr. van der Silva, so the next distribution conflict is coming. So it's not that European, but global distribution about the vaccine. And many Western countries, the European Union, have also said that they have already reserved a lot of vaccine. And we also said that we would share the vaccine with poorer countries, with the initiative of the WHO, and also the G20 have also taken on the obligation without concrete numbers. However, will the Europeans keep that promise, and how much of the 300 million vaccine doses are going to be passed on?
I think we, the Europeans, were and we are exemplary in this regard. First of all, President Ursula von der Leyen led a process, an international process, in order to guarantee that we could support the researchers and the industry in producing as soon as possible a vaccine, an efficient vaccine, and to conceive it from the very start as a public good that has to be universal. And this was a very important difference of the European Union in comparisons, for instance, with the Trump administration or China. And we succeeded in joining a group, in constituting a group of countries that were engaged in this process to accelerate the production of a vaccine that could be a public universal good. And all the processes that we are doing and all the decisions the Commission has been taking are in that sense, in that direction. And each country, each member state has to do its part. For instance, in Portugal, we shall reserve a certain number of vaccines for our cooperation agency in order to share the vaccines with our partners in cooperation. In Portugal, this means mainly the countries, the African countries that share our language, so the Portuguese-speaking countries, as Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, and so on. And also in Asia, East Timor, that is also a Portuguese-speaking country. And this is the first priority of our distribution of the vaccine outside our own country. But of course, we shall integrate the European partnership with African countries, with Latin American countries, and so on, because it is very, very important that the vaccine can be accessible to all, that can be understood as a universal good, a common good of the humanity. And of course, the recent news from America are really good news, because President-elect Biden has the opposite stance of President Trump. And he himself, as us, considers the vaccine as a public good, so we expect that the United States can join us in this effort to make the vaccine accessible to all humanity, rich countries and North countries, North and South, Europe and non-European countries. I think this will be, I fully agree with Heiko, because we realized that in the first wave of the pandemic, we did some mistakes. But I think we are really reacting in a good way with a very important leadership of the European Commission in this second wave, coordinating our measures, accelerating the production of vaccine, and establishing, implementing right now the strategy for vaccination. Thank you.
Could you give me a certain number how much Portugal will share from its contingent within the framework of the EU initiative and the initiatives that you mentioned for African countries?
Not yet. First of all, because the calculus is still going on. And secondly, you understand I have to tell my parliament in the first steps. If not, I will be very criticized. Oh, sorry.
Well, the European populations are much older than the populations in many of the developing countries and poorer countries. How do you explain that to the Portuguese citizen and European citizens within the presidency that senior citizens, European senior citizens, maybe will be vaccinated later than a young teacher in one of the African countries that you mentioned?
No, I think that the criteria to establish the pace of vaccination are already clear. And of course, we have as first priority the groups of risk, people that are not healthy, people that are in the front line of the combat against the pandemic, as doctors, nurses, and so on. And of course, we shall use the criterion of the age group. So what we have to do is not to distinguish between nationalities, We have to begin by the older people in Europe, the older people in Africa, the older people in Latin America. The youngsters in Europe can wait a little more, as the youngsters in Africa, as the youngsters of Latin America. Of course, we are Europeans, so we shall reserve a lot of vaccines, some part of a vaccine, maximum part of vaccines for the Europeans. But it is very important that from the very start, we can act as we speak, because the correspondence between words and actions define the good politicians and the good policies. So from the very starting point of the vaccination strategy, we have to enlarge the scope of this vaccination in terms that we can help from the very beginning also the poorer countries and our partners in Africa and Latin America and other regions of the world.
Mr. Luca? For the G20 summit, he said that Trump would want to vaccinate all Americans first and then maybe think about spreading the vaccine and sharing the vaccine with other poorer countries. So your Prime Minister indicated that he's close to the politics of Trump. What do you think of the strategy? How is Slovenia going to act within its presidency and the vaccination strategy? What do you advocate? Slovenia was always an active partner of Europe and the EU. And I think in this question, both with the development of a new vaccine as well as the decision on the distribution of the vaccine doses in the future, there's going to be a pioneering role of my country in the sense of understanding the big dangers that we have if the distribution is only distributed one-sidedly. So you have to consider that the vaccination against corona is connected with three key points. First of all, with the development of a new vaccine. At this moment, there are a few providers, but the capacities are not sufficient with actually bridling the global pandemic. And then there's the next key question, and that is the just distribution of the vaccine to the users. And there is a global crisis. In other words, the distribution needs to be global as well, because when the pandemic starts in one place of the world, it's going to spread very quickly to all over the world. And at the same time, we are in a dirty game of unjust solutions. So in other words, the distribution of medicine and economy, and that's why it's important, so within this crisis, that we also get a media support of our action. So we mustn't forget that there is a certain degree of distrust, first of all, with regard to the effect, and then the just distribution with regard to the vaccine. So I believe that the EU Commission will consider all of these factors and bring them together effectively. And that's why we believe and that's why we have taken over the strategies, both with regard to procedure as well as with regard to priorities, that the risk groups need to be treated first, and those with comorbidities and previous morbidities and the risk groups where the mortality rate is especially high, and also those people who are in contact. So in other words, the health service needs to be relieved, and then we've got the army and the civil services and the public service. That is nearly half of the population in Slovenia. And so in this first wave, in the first stage of the vaccination, Slovenia must have at least 1 million doses of the vaccine. And I believe that the EU, so with the foundation that we've brought together, is going in the right direction. And what is also important is, so far as we cannot manage in the first phase to build trust, later on it's going to be very difficult indeed to gain this trust. And then there's going to be more protests in all countries, including Slovenia, and will put damage to the goodwill of everyone fighting against this crisis.
Ich würde gerne gleich bei Ihnen bleiben und ein bisschen springen, aber
Well, we are going to continue talking about Corona. This 750 billion recovery fund, as you have all decided, was decided upon on the basis of a consensus. But there's a blockade now by Poland and Hungary, and the money cannot be dispersed because of fund distribution being linked to the principle of the rule of law. Your president, Janez Janša, has just written to the presidency of the EU, only an independent judicial organ can decide what the rule of law is. What did your president mean? What do you criticize? Germany is the first in our triple presidency, and we are very happy to have Germany, and we are happy because Germany can really help us to overcome this financial crisis. I also would like to thank the German presidency, because Slovenia has been playing a very constructive role over a long period of time, and we know how important the recovery fund is. As you know, at the beginning of the recovery fund negotiations, the Slovenian government has already signed the letter calling upon the heads of state to overcome the corona crisis. And as a result, at the end of the day, we found a new instrument, Next Generation. And this helps us to successfully overcome consequences. At the same time, we also have emphasized that it is very important to find a solution that will not be prevented on the basis of a veto executed by one state, because we all depend on the recovery funds. So what we are talking about is not just an individual isolated question. On the diplomatic level, I think all politicians, all presidents need to get together and at the end of the day, find a common solution. We must make sure that we don't end up in a stalemate. We have to work together with all member states in order to find an agreement that is acceptable to all citizens and provides the right answers for everyone, given the difficult circumstances we are confronted with. As I have said, it is not just diplomacy. It's a question that, first of all, has something to do with the balance of relations between institutions and member states. When we talk about the rule of law, it's a key question for all of us. It's important for all member states, and in particular, we have to look at those states that used to have a history of a communist regime, and they were aspiring to the rule of law, and they wanted to have a regime that is fair and punishes the bad guys and rewards the good ones. That was the very reason why we joined the EU, and that is why it's so important for us how this system works. And indeed, when we look at the situation, it's important to have the rule of law, but we do not have to over-politicize, because those are topics that can be used as weapons by some. And last but not least, we also must appeal to all states to ensure the rule of law, and the rule of law must be determined by the judiciary, by the legislator, not just those who are in power for the time being. Of course, the traditional democracy have a different view on the rule of law compared to states that have just emerged from a repressive system 30 years ago. And it seems that this debate broke out during the crisis. Of course, we have to accept the fact that we look at the situation from different angles. But basically, we are all in the same boat. And we all share the values that are the cornerstone of the European Union. Mr. Maas, was it a mistake to use this moment of crisis in order to start an excessive politicized debate about the rule of law mechanism? Was it a mistake to link that to the recovery fund, because billions of people are waiting for this money, and especially the states of the south need that money urgently? First of all, let me confirm what was said by Angie. Our triple presidency means that we are coordinating very closely, not just as far as the coronavirus is concerned. We also look at the Green Deal, climate change and migration. We are presidents for 6 months, and that is, of course, not enough to finalize topics. Many topics, such as climate change, are going to keep us busy for a long time to come. And in this triple presidency, we have a close coordination, because we have to hand over the dossiers from one country to the other. We would like to develop them further, be it Brexit, be it the financial assistance, and Slovenia was very helpful for us. And I am firmly convinced that this is also going to happen now, where we are trying to find a solution for the topic of the rule of law. The rule of law is a topic that we have been discussing for a long time. There is Article 7 that was invoked vis-à-vis Hungary and Poland, and there was a decision taken by the Council, the European Council, in July, where we were together for quite some time in order to agree on the rule of law mechanism. And the European Parliament has endorsed this and has made the very same demand to introduce a rule of law mechanism. It is our task as presidents now to sort of bring that to a close. We want to make sure that the funds do get to those places where they are urgently needed now. And this is a decision we have taken together. It is a decision that is in favor of conditionality, the rule of law conditionality. And the rule of law is one of the foundations, one of the cornerstones of the European Union. And adherence to that principle will be one of the prerequisites for receiving funding. We're not going to reverse our financial mechanisms, but it is a mechanism that we have introduced on purpose. And it's going to be part and parcel of the process of negotiation. There is no option to reverse that mechanism and to take it out of the compromise. These are agreements we have made on the level of the European Council and the Parliament. And we are sure that because of the pressure, it will be possible until the December Council meeting to find a solution. Like Antje said, those countries that are part of the European Union came to us, joined us, because we share the same model, the same values, and it seems to be an interesting model. Europe is the place to be for many people. If you ask people escaping from their countries, most of those people would say would like to go to Europe. It does not only have to do with prosperity, it also has to do with the values that we have adopted in liberal democracy. These are values such as freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. This is the model that keeps our European Union together. And that is why we are all committed and must be committed to that model. And we are going to go through these difficult negotiations. We are not going to have this debate in public, and that is why we are not going to make any public proposals how to find a solution. But we need a solution, and we need it soon, as quickly as possible. And I am convinced that everybody knows about their responsibility and will make a contribution to finding that solution in the coming days. Mr. De Silva, do you share Mr. Maas's optimism that there will be a solution during the December summit? Of course, you cannot talk about this solution, but do you think there is something you can offer to Poland and Hungary to overcome the bad mood there?
Well, I must say that I share Heiko Maas' optimism, and I really trust in the capacity of the German presidency to get a solution, and specifically on Chancellor Angela Merkel's ability to do that. As a sociologist, that is my professional background, I always prefer to consider very carefully the arguments of the others. And what are the arguments the Polish and the Hungarians are telling us, are invoking? Two arguments. They say that they need a legal certainty. They think as it is, the mechanism introduces a sort of uncertainty, and they cannot accept that uncertainty. That's the first argument. And the second argument is that they say that they fought a lot to recover their national sovereignty vis-à-vis the Soviet hegemony, empire, and they don't want to lose their national sovereignty. So I think these two arguments, we can address them very easily. We can guarantee Hungary and Poland that first, there is legal certainty in the mechanism we created. There is legal certainty in the sort of compromise that the European Council mandated, and it was obtained in accordance with the European Parliament. And there is legal certainty when the Commission has the responsibility to identify certain breaches in the rule of law, then give the opportunity to the countries to defend themselves and to appeal to the Council and so on. There is legal certainty in this mechanism that we created. And this is not an issue of national sovereignty. We fully respect the national sovereignty of Poland, of Hungary, of Germany, of Slovenia, of Portugal, of Luxembourg, of Spain. We all respect each other. This is a common engagement, a common commitment. As members of the European Union, we are committed to the Article 2 of the treaty that says that the European community is a community, the European Union is a community of democracies, democracies that respect the rule of law. And what does it mean, the rule of law? Well, it means very simple things that are easy to understand. The independence of courts, the independence of the judiciary vis-à-vis the executive, the governments, freedom of press, and the rights of the parties in the opposition. Democracy means that when you are in the opposition, you are entitled to exist, and the others recognize your rights, your capacity, and your right to become a power if the electoral vote will allow it. So we need to see in each of the member states if we are fighting correctly corruption, if we are guaranteeing the independence of courts, if we are guaranteeing the freedom and independence of press, and if we are respecting the rights of those who are in opposition. And one of the most important things, first the Croatian presidency and then the German presidency did, was to enlarge to all the member states this assessment. We now have another mechanism. We have an annual report by the European Commission assessing all the member states in what regards the rule of law. And then we have the scrutiny of groups of 5 members each semester. It began with the German presidents, with Belgium, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, I think, and another country. Portugal will lead the assessment of another 5 member states group: Spain, Germany, France, Denmark, and so on. And all of us, and each of us, will be submitted to this peer review. So we have mechanisms that are convergent and whose goal is very simple, is to guarantee that all of us respect Article 2 of the treaty, that all of us can have the right information and assessment to reinforce their rule of law, their democracies. So I think there are conditions. What we cannot accept is veto. So the current position of the Hungarian government and of the Polish government are not acceptable, because we cannot accept the logic of veto in such a crucial domain as it is the rule of law for the European Union.
So we could discuss this at length, but I'd like to move on and discuss the elections in the United States, and maybe in the direction of the viewers in the live stream and also in the conference tool. We've got more 15 minutes, and then there's time for your questions. So the 3 foreign ministers, you can prepare your questions. So, but first of all, we will discuss amongst one another the elections in the United States. Mr. Mars, on Monday, Joe Biden talked to Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel, the president, and the government leaders of France, Germany, UK, and Ireland. Red Day were called beforehand. So Joe Biden doesn't seem to take the European Union so seriously, does he? Well, just wait and see. So I believe that, and Joe Biden and some of his team have made it quite clear that it's about the transatlantic relationship, and to repair that relationship, you have to say it honestly, and also relationship with the European Union should be improved, and that is urgently required, because the past years, I would describe, well, looking at the so-called West, I would describe that as damage control of the past years, be it about the large crises of Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, first and foremost. It was damage control. So to meet the great challenges of like climate change, and USA is leaving the Paris Climate Agreement. That's damage control we need to put into place there. And but that's enough. Now it's enough. And so the challenges that we see ourselves faced with, we don't live up to these challenges with just damage control. And that had something to do with the fact that within the so-called West, there was two fundamentally different models that were facing off one another, which we weren't used to. The one was my country first strategy, and the other one is multilateralism. We in Europe are multilateralists, and the European Union is a result of multilateralism. And together with my French colleagues, I did the Alliance for Multilateralism that I set up, and there we've got more than 70 countries of all parts of the world. They've all got the same insight, and that is the challenges we're facing at the moment: globalization, the digitization, climate change, migration. All of that have one in common. They don't know no borders, but also their goal is overcoming borders, and you need international solutions for this. The worst that could happen in a time where we need more international cooperation to have less. So those were the past years, and that's why. So in the big issues, we didn't really make progress. And I do hope that's changing at the moment, because Joe Biden as well as others said quite clearly that they want more international cooperation, and they want to see to it that the transatlantic relationship becomes better, and that we together are going to work on solutions and are not going to work against one another. And we want to improve the free trade instead of doing punitive customs dues, so that we can continue like that, right? The result is because the West didn't cooperate any longer, in many situations there were vacuums, like in China. And Russia actually utilized the vacuum. So my expectation is that this is a chance that it's not like we can lean back easily in our seats. No, on the contrary, we as Europeans need to get up out of our seats, because the United States of America, I mean, they're not going to change everything. I hope that a lot is going to become better with Joe Biden, but the priorities of the U.S. Foreign and security policy is not going to change so much, at least with regard to the subjects. I mean, China is going to be the big subject, and the United States, I think, are going to dedicate themselves more to the Pacific region in their foreign and security policy as compared to the past. And if we want to improve the transatlantic relationship and we want a new deal, then we may have to make offers. Then we as Europeans have to say, yes, our offer needs to be to cooperate with America in security as well as foreign policy goals. And we have to also look more after the East European countries, Western Balkan, and also Middle East, and also Africa is at least our medium kind of neighborhood. We have to talk about that. And it's not like it'll lead to the situation that everything's going to be like we were used to in the past. This is a task that we also have in the European Union to really organize on a European level, and also with the view of one of the big issues like China. There, too, the priority of the USA will be both the foreign and security policy as well as economic policies. So China, we in the European Union say it's a systemic rival, and USA is a partner in values, but it doesn't mean that we would be 100% on one side. No, we've got our own interests as well, But it's absolutely clear that in Europe and the USA, we share the values, but also economic interests. So we should connect more, and so then we're going to have other possibilities also acting towards China. So there's many opportunities that arise from the US elections, but this doesn't mean that everything is going to go back to what it used to be. No, we need a European strategy. We need more European sovereignty in the foreign and security policy, and that's why it's one of the big headlines of our presidency. And I think with the elections in the USA, with Joe Biden and his team, so we're going to make progress on all of these questions with the challenges we're all dealing with, that at long last, step by step, we're going to find real answers. Minister Logar, you're Janis Janša, Prime Minister in the United States. First, he congratulated Donald Trump and said it's pretty clear that Trump had won the election. Has he meanwhile congratulated Joe Biden? Well, amongst others, the Prime Minister also recognized the significance of the transatlantic relations, and they are a key message. And now I'm happy to say that this is both in the domestic political scene as well as in the European public, and the political public, this plays a big role. So you have to be aware that this dialogue between Europe and United States of America was pushed aside in the recent times. So the last summit actually happened in 2014, and now we're talking about the significance of the transatlantic relationship. And we haven't had a good relationship for some years now, both over the past years, in the latter years of Mr. Obama, as well as the entire mandate of Mr. Trump. So I think in this transatlantic dialogue, there's too much that people look at the other too much, and one cannot achieve satisfying results. Like a few days ago, there was the civil partnership, and during that event, there was the transatlantic pact has not managed to promote the market economy cooperation between the United States and the European Union. So we need to catch up, so that I'm happy that we're becoming aware of this necessity, that we have to do something. So I believe that all of these messages that arrive from all sides is a good sign that we're taking a step forward. And I believe that already during the presidency, we're going to be able to do that. And I believe that there's time, so in the near future, so maybe throughout 2021. So the government of Slovenia, did they congratulate President-elect Joe Biden? Well, the Slovenian government has not congratulated, because also the message that you mentioned of the Prime Minister came through his personal account, and this could also happen in the future. I personally always congratulate the foreign minister once they're appointed. So we've got a few more minutes, And I would just address one subject that was discussed under the Donald Trump administration, just to get the feeling what you think, as Mr. Santos Silva, is the trade. So under the presidency of Donald Trump, there's various customs on sweets and steel and aluminium. Mr. Dos Santos, do you imagine that Joe Biden will lift these sanctions or these customs?
In my view, the worst mistakes of the Trump administration was to suspend the negotiations that were ongoing for a new trade agreement between the European Union and the United States. And I think it's clear that we need to resume this negotiation because it is very, very important that trade between European Union and the United States can occur in the best conditions. We have now, a week ago, we had the signing of new trade treaty between China, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, Japan, and all the countries, the member states of ASEAN, of the Association of the Southeast Asia. We are about to conclude the trade agreement between the European Union and the Mercosur, Latin America. We are trying to launch negotiations continent to continent between the European Union and Africa, because nowadays Africa has already its own free trade agreement in a continental scale. We are about to conclude, I hope, I pray God, I hope, to conclude an agreement on the future relationship between the UK and the European Union. So we have to resume the talks, the conversations with the United States in order to get the best conditions we can to our trade and economic relations. We belong to the West, both the European Union and the United States. My disagreement with the Trump administration was a disagreement on not only on content, but also and most of all on language, stance, methods, because we were permanently treated by our American friends under the Trump administration, not as friends and allies, but as adversaries or even enemies. And we are always asked to choose. Either we are with us, the Americans, or you are with China. Of course we are with them, the Americans, but not as a minor partner, not as a follower. Yes, as a continent, Europe, that has its own interests, and one of its basic interests is to have good relationship with all regions of the world. China, of course, but also India, but also Latin America, but also Africa, and even, if possible, with Russia. That this openness characterizes Europe. It's not a question of being a minor partner of the United States. It's a question of being a full and equal partner of the United States, who is our ally.
Umgekehrt hat ja die EU gerade.
Well, on the other hand, the European Union has just imposed 4 billion tariffs on American goods. And that was allowed by the WTO. It was punitive tariffs imposed because of subsidies for Boeing. Is that something we should revoke now that Biden was elected?
The sanctions were approved by the European Commission. It's competence. But the ministers of trade under the presidency of Minister Peter Altmaier discussed these sanctions. And we all agreed that, of course, yes, we had to approve the sanctions, And in approving them, we said publicly and immediately that any return of the United States to the negotiation table would mean the suspension of the sanctions we were approving. I think it's clear.
Herr Maas, wenn jetzt
Mr. Maas. Now, the United States and Europe are going to return to the negotiating table. What could be the goal of such negotiation? Paul Ziemiak, the CDU Secretary General, has just proposed that we should start negotiating a new free trade agreement. Do you think that's possible? First of all, we have to recognize that all over the world there are new free trade agreements being concluded, and we must be interested too in promoting free trade with the United States of America, organizing and regulating that in a different way compared to what we used to have in the past is important. And that is why I think it is on our agenda now. But it's one of many items on our agenda. And we are going to have to talk to Joe Biden and his team. First of all, they need some more time to develop a position regarding our items on the agenda. For us as Europeans, it's important that we are willing and ready to start talking. We are willing and ready to negotiate because we cannot go on like we did in recent years. It's to the detriment of the United States and the European Union alike. My colleague is right. We should insist on being an equal partner, and that is a very important topic anyway. If Europe is not in a position to agree on the important questions like trade policy, like foreign policy and security policy, we need common strategies. What are our guidelines? We need to find agreement on that. We, as the federal government of Germany, have decided Indian Pacific guidelines. We also must offer something to these big lenient. And the European Union, of course, needs their own Indo-Pacific guidelines. And I'm saying that also with a view to the United States. They cannot just rely, and we cannot rely on the United States of America. The old times are not going to come back. We have to be prepared for that. That is why we need our own strategy as Europeans for the big topics of the present day. And if we don't succeed on developing our own strategy, we will still be always thrown between the big competitors, United States and Russia. We don't want that. We need and we want more European sovereignty in all those important topics. Let me just give one more example. We also would like to become more sovereign in digital technologies, because it's also one of the examples. Where is our position between the United States and China? We have our own interests, but we are not interested in a decoupling, the so-called decoupling between the US and China. And digitization is not just an economic issue. It's also very important for democracy. It's also a question of power of the future. Opinions, information, all of that will be distributed in a digital way. And at the moment, during the corona pandemic, we see a struggle for narratives, and we see the abuse that occurs. And that is why we are interested in getting a digital sovereignty here in Europe. At the moment, we have two centers of power. One is the American model, the Silicon Valley, which is just focused on profit, and the other is the Chinese model of digitization, and it has a lot to do with repressions. And I think none of the two models is the model that we can subscribe to from the point of view of European values. So, starting with the router up to the cloud and the infrastructure, we need to do that. So we, during our presidency, have developed lots of projects, and those projects include also artificial intelligence. We have to preserve a certain degree of independence, both from the West and the East. And so the question of European sovereignty is very important, is of paramount importance in all the issues we are discussing. It is one of the prerequisites for a normalization of our transatlantic partnership, because the Americans, even under Biden, are going to have higher expectations regarding the Europeans. Thank you very much. This brings me to the questions of our audience. We have received questions via live stream and also from our conference tool. I have received some questions and they're listed on my iPad. If you have more questions, you can use the conference tool if you're a participant. If you're a live stream viewer, just tweet your question under #Berlin Forum. And there's a team behind the scenes that are going to communicate your questions to me. Mr. Maas, my first question goes to you. Volker Pertes asks an important topic about security affairs. He said you talked about transatlantic division of labor. What could be a European offer for burden sharing in a transatlantic partnership, defense spending included and beyond? When it comes to defense spending, the so-called famous burden sharing, when we look at NATO, I don't think the American position is going to change much. The Americans are going to call upon us to fulfill the 2% spending, defense spending goal that we have committed to. And I think now the way in which we talk to the Americans will change a lot. When we look at Africa, I mean, we are active in Libya. We have several European initiatives for the Sahel region. We are currently thinking about the role of the European Union could play in the Middle East peace process. During the last meeting of foreign ministers, we had our colleague from Ramallah staying with us virtually. When we met in Berlin, our colleague from Israel came to join us. So, of course, we do not think we will play the one and only role, but everybody tells us we can make contribution, and this Middle East peace process has become more dynamic. We can contribute to making it even more dynamic. The Western Balkans are an important topic. There were several initiatives launched by the White House in particular as regards the normalization between Serbia and Kosovo. And in parallel to that, there was the dialogue process under the leadership of the European Union. But those two processes were never properly linked to each other. And I think we could have a much better coordination, a much better division of labor in order to develop a common road. For Eastern Europe, Ukraine will be a topic. And here I believe the European Union will or must be a major driving force, and we do that in the Normandy format together with France. Then regional security between Iran and the Gulf states is an important topic, and here I think that is also in our neighborhood. And we are willing to talk to the United States about those topics. We would like to have common strategies, but we are also willing and ready to talk to the United States who is going to assume responsibility where and for what. And I think this is the expectation that Washington has. And this is the expectation that Joe Biden is going to have. And we have to sort of rally in Europe and take a decision which will be our priorities and what can be our input.
Adebar, und verweist auf
The next question is Cornelius Adebar. So he's pointing to a conflict of interest within the EU that he sees between those who think an alliance with the United States is more important than acknowledging multilateralism. How does Germany, how does EU want to deal with these conflicts of interest within Europe about the transatlantic relationship? So those who are more critical towards China or who are more on the side of the United States. So maybe you, Mr. Santos Silva, do you see such conflict of interest within the European Union, and when they break out, and if there's also a Biden administration will be China critical too?
I must say that I do see the diversity of opinions and traditions and the historical backgrounds among the member states of the European Union. And I say, well, this is one of the fundaments of our union. We are not a bloc. We are a mosaic of different countries with different languages, with different traditions, and with different stories. But we did achieve to have a common position in our foreign policy, which is decided by unanimity. It's very important to take this into consideration. All the decisions we make in terms of foreign policies are unanimous decisions, either by a consensus or by formal vote demanding unanimity. And these positions are very stable, solid, and very important in terms of the global order. For instance, we have a common position in what regards the Middle East peace process. We are all engaged in the two-state solution. We have also a common policy regarding China. And this is a policy that recognizes the complexity of the China's situation. And we say that for us, China means four complementary things. First of all, a partner in a certain number of very important multilateral agendas. The most important of them is the Paris Agreement, the climate action. We cannot achieve the targets of climate action without the full participation of China. And that's why Germany, Portugal, I think also Slovenia, we welcomed the intervention of President Xi in the General Assembly of the United Nations when he said, well, our engagement, I'm here to say that by 2060, China will achieve the climatic neutrality. And we now expect that the United States can finally join the Paris Agreement and also participate in this common effort. So they are partners. The Chinese are partners of us in very important multilateral agendas. Then they are partners in the sense that we have negotiating partners. There are some areas in which we have convergent interests and we work together. There are other areas in which we have divergent interests, we don't cooperate. Third, they are one of our economic competitors. For instance, in Africa, we compete with the Chinese in Africa, and it's a normal stance. And as ICOMAS like the Americans, ICOMAS mentioned that fourth and last but not the least, they are our rival, systemic rival, because the way we think of institutions, rule of law, human rights is very different from the Chinese point of view. So we have this formulation. It was established in a communication by the High Representative and the Commission, and it was supported by the European Affairs Council. We have this definition that is a complex one of the China and what China means. In the framework of NATO, it is very important to take into consideration that in London, in the last leaders' meeting, we approved, again by unanimity, a declaration that defines very clearly that NATO has one permanent threat, adversary. It's international terrorism. That NATO considers that the aggressive behavior of Russia represents another threat. And NATO considers that the current emergence of China as a global power means a new reality that we need to understand. I'm quoting almost literally the London Declaration. So we have a very important, rather complex position. So that's why I don't think there is a conflict of interest within the European Union. And the complexity of foreign policy cannot be reduced to a zero-sum game. Either you are with A or you are with B. I always remember your president, Franz Wilhelm Steinmeier, when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he said, well, I cannot express the German foreign policy in a 150 characters tweet. I'm not able to do that. It's much more complex than this. And I think your president is fully right.
Now Twitter has more characters.
Yes, okay. A bit more complexity.
Wir sind jetzt schon fast am Ende.
So we're nearly at the end. I've got one more question that I would ask you to answer in one sentence, all of you. And this is a conflict in Karabakh. And Russia's got an armistice here that they mediated. Ute Fink-Krämer's writes and secures it with a military peace mission. Do you think it makes sense to replace it by a civil, or to add a civil observer mission of the EU? Mr. Maas, what do you think? Well, I think it's important to include OSCE through the Minsk group. And OSCE has possibilities, also observer missions. Do you want to answer as well? Civil observer mission?
Framework. And we need now to be very carefully looking into the rights of the Armenians who live in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Herr Logar, wie sollte die EU in...
Mr. Logar, what about the EU in Körber-Stiftung? How can it act there? Well, this story with the military conflict shows that frozen conflicts will or can break out at any time and later on. That's why all those who've got the possibility of contributing to resolving the conflict should do that in time. One needs to know that Armenia, as well as Azerbaijan, are the eastern partner states with which the EU cooperates. And so I think so we have managed to achieve some progress, but not when the passions break out in one state, and that just shows that the EU needs to invest more in this region and needs to be a partner in seeking agreement. And this region, with its soft power that it has, should not lessen. So, thank you very much, the three of you, that you took the time to be here, for your answers, for the discussion, as well as for your frankness. So all of you for watching, the viewers and the questions and to listening. And I would like to hand over once more to Jana Fix.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was the opening forum of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum 2020, Turning Crisis into Opportunity, Europe in a Post-Pandemic World Order. My name is Liana Fix. I will lead us through a full plate of discussions today, from relations with China to US politics and German security policy. Stay tuned, contribute your comments and questions, and we will be back in 30 minutes for a conflict zone interview in cooperation with DW. See you back at 11 a.m.